Here we go. So first of all, thank you so much for everybody that joined me this morning for that impromptu live video. Thank you so much. I think that we talked a lot. Well, I know we talked a lot about pricing and value, and what it boiled down to is a lot of people that is mindset, that the whole thing about pricing is mindset. And once you determine your own worth and value and you can articulate the value that you're giving to other people, you won't have any problem charging what you need to charge. I talked to Whitney. Whitney's in the group, and we're going to actually do a live video about bartering. Someone asked a great question about bartering, and I knew that the perfect person to talk about this with would be Whitney of Barter Babes. So thanks, Whitney. Let's jump into Murray's Law. How can I protect myself? How can I protect myself when I'm speaking for other people? And this came about because I have different clients that are speakers, and they have produced contents, and they have courses, and they have all types of things, and they're having different opportunities presented to them, and they want to make sure that, one, at the end of the day, their intellectual property is protected. They want to make sure that their speech is protected. They want to make sure that any type of workbooks they have is protected, that type of things. And so the bottom line is you need written agreements. If you're talking, you need written agreements. Hey ladies, and that's how you protect yourself. When I think about written agreements, there's a blog post that I wrote maybe like 2 years ago regarding Kevin Hart. Kevin Hart, maybe it's more than last year, but Kevin Hart had a movie coming out, and Sony was producing the movie, and they were mad at him because he wasn't using his social media to promote the movie, and he didn't use his social media account to promote the movie because it wasn't in his contract. He didn't have an agreement with them for him to do so, so it wasn't his responsibility. When it comes to speaking, you have a responsibility to make sure that you have your understanding written down on paper, because what happens a lot of times is that these people that you're speaking, these different groups, they believe that once you speak, and if they record it, that that's their content to do whatever they want to with. And we can't have that, can we? We can't have our content just being floating around and controlled by someone else. So you need to have a written agreement that has a clear clause that says that your intellectual property is yours and it cannot be used without your consent. That's just the bottom line. Another thing to be aware of as a speaker is if it's being live streamed or if it's being recorded. You want to control that because, as you say, intellectual property, when it relates to copyrights, because now we're talking about copyrights, not so much trademarks. When it comes to copyrights, copyrights protect original work in a fixed, tangible form. Well, once that's recorded, that becomes copyrighted material. Who owns it? So you're the one that's putting on the speech, right? And that speech is oral. It's not in a written form unless you have it written out somewhere beforehand. So you want to make it very clear, because these people that are putting on these conferences and stuff, they think that if they record you, they can go and do whatever they want to whenever they want to. And if that's not what you want, you need to let them know that they do not have your permission to use your likeness without your permission. They don't have your permission to video the presentation. They don't have your permission to live stream the presentation, especially if it's some content that you normally pay for, and you want to make sure that only people that pay for the content have access to it. And that's whether you're speaking at a conference or if maybe you're speaking for your own event, and and it's a paid event, and you want to make sure that the people that are there are not live streaming this. So because if they live stream it, then instead of getting the payment, for 10 people, you could have been getting payment from 100 people because they live streamed it and 90 people are watching it. So now you have missed out on the content, on that payment. So the main thing you want to do is make sure your contract, your written contracts, have clauses in there that address intellectual property. I've seen contracts where they don't talk about intellectual property, where they talk about any documents created for the use of this conference. Well, that's confusing. What do you mean any documents or information prepared for this conference? Like, I've created my materials before this conference, but I'm using them at this conference. But, you want to be very clear on that. So everybody understand that we're going to use written agreements, and that is not just for people. That's just not for offline events. That's also for online events. For online events, you want to be very clear of what the people can and cannot do. Maybe you're doing a teleconference, right? Well, maybe it's a free teleconference when you do it. Are you going to give them permission to repackage it and then sell it without compensating you? You need to have these type of discussions with the people, and then those discussions need to be reduced to writing. Any questions about that? I hope that answers some questions. And that's the main thing that you do. You have to put it in writing. Once you put it in writing, then you have something that you can enforce, and you have talked to them about it. So what happens a lot of times is that there's not even a conversation about it. People don't, you assume as the content producer that is your information and they can't do anything with it and they won't do anything with it. They assume as the event producer or organizer that, well, if we record it, if we capture it in any type of way, it's ours and we can do with it whatever we want to. Y'all are not on the same page. And so instead of making assumptions, y'all need to talk and get on the same page and reduce it to writing. I know a lot of times, especially when we're dealing with the online world, we are hesitant to put things in writing. We're hesitant to say, hey, I want to be clear about this, because you don't want to seem like you're doing too much, because, oh, it's just a webinar, or, oh, it's just a joint live, or, oh, it's just whatever it is, telesummit. So you want to be clear. You want to be clear on what the party's intentions are and how your stuff is going to be used. So that's my advice. That's how you protect yourself as a speaker. And the two main things that you need to look for, your speaker agreement has to have an intellectual property clause. So whether they say intellectual property, whether they say copyright, whether they say trademarks, it needs to have a clause in there that addresses that. And that clause cannot contain an assignment, because if that intellectual property clause contains an assignment, meaning that you are assigning your rights and interests to them, then guess what you just did? You just said bye-bye intellectual property rights. And that's not what you're trying to do. So make sure that you are going over, one, that you have a written agreement, two, that the written agreement discusses intellectual property, and three, that it does not include an assignment clause unless that is in fact your intention. All right, any questions? That was a really good question for Murray's Law. I'm really glad that we got to talk about that. I just really, really want to stress the importance of using written agreements. So that's what I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a great weekend. Have an amazing weekend. I will talk to you all later.